Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. This week, we are joined by Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, well, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. So, you sent me your book, and I had not, unfortunately, enough time to go through all of it, but I did read in chunks and do what I could to make sure, and then I will read all of it for sure, because I'm interested in some of the key concepts and reading more about them. So we're going to talk about your book today, but I'm very curious. I'm always curious about people's earlier years. Do you know what I mean? Like, how did the wheel get set in motion, and what was that like?
Well, and the wheel you're referring to maybe is how did I even become a therapist in the first place, that sort of thing, or
yes.
Then how did I get interested in betrayal and forgiveness? And
yes,
sure. Well, I had a should I say checkered career? I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but I was my undergraduate degree was in East Asian studies, specializing in Japanese. Never became fluent, but I was just fascinated by the languages. Ended up, I had also been a math major previously. I ended up becoming a statistician. I got a master's degree in statistics. And while I was there at the University of Vermont, which is where I got the master's degree, I did my master's thesis on a very psychological topic. And they didn't have a PhD program in statistics there, but they did have one in psychology. And so I ended up getting my PhD in psychology, although on the research side, not so much the clinical side. So that was, how old was I when that happened? I was in my early 30s when I got I think it was 31 when I got my PhD. And a few years later, the marriage I was then in went through some really hard times. I mean, the short story of my first marriage is that both my ex and I have gone on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. That's basically the short story of my first marriage. But through that process, and it took a number of years to kind of figure that out, through that process, I encountered therapy, and I found, and it's funny, I encountered therapy. I had some good therapists and some really not very good therapists, but even the not very good therapists, which is kind of the state of the world, isn't it? Even the not very good therapists, I found, wow, what a powerful thing to do. And I felt like I want to be involved in this. There's something about this I think I could do. And so I started getting the clinical training so that I could become a clinical psychologist. And so I did that and got my license and hung out a shingle and started seeing folks. I did internships for a number of years. And I found myself gravitating more and more to working with couples. I think because it's so directly, it's not, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, I suppose, but it's not navel gazing. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, let me develop myself. I don't mean to sound scornful of that. That's a fine thing to do, but it's so much more intense and consequential than that right in the room, because
Absolutely. It's a complex organism, right?
Yes.
And it's extraordinarily nuanced relationships, especially the marital bed.
Yep.
Right? Excuse me. And also, I think there's an element within marriage counseling where there's almost sort of in my thought process, you can see sort of immediate returns if the work is done within the group, right?
Yeah.
So whereas you might spend 12 weeks with one person and see a slow grind, but you can see something actually very naturally or organically happen between two people when they're taught how to converse or how to articulate their desires and emotions, or what they're lacking or feel they're lacking in that relationship.
Yeah, the stakes are higher.
It's very interesting to me. I have a background in counseling education, but I never went forward with it for the opposite reason, countertransference.
Yes.
So for me, it's I just care too much, and I think I wouldn't be able to put that to bed. But then there's also the component of I'd probably at some point end up in jail. Because someone
That
would
is a
share.
concern if you're right.
Yep.
If you get too
And
involved in the wrong ways. Yes, indeed.
well, no, not in that way.
Ah,
But like it was the same reason I didn't follow through with my law degree,
ah.
because if somebody told me that they were guilty of child abuse or something like that, like I don't know, I just all of these things just became too much to bear. But so
Mm.
I've used the education that I've acquired to do great in leadership and other aspects of my life, but not with therapy. So I get it. So, so I just want to call it like 31. I'm assuming you graduated and went immediately to university,
So
and then you went.
well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I graduated. I mean, in the States, I graduated, and I think was it immediately? No, I didn't immediately go to graduate school. I worked for a couple of years, actually, for state government in
Okay.
the state of Vermont, and that's what got me involved in statistics. And that's when I wanted to get a master's degree in statistics. So there was a couple of years between the time I graduated with my undergraduate degree, which was, by the way, from the University of Toronto. So I have some experience in Canada.
Well, it's funny because you keep
Uh,
saying Vermont, and like Vermont is like my happy place.
ah,
Like I have spent so much time in Vermont, and have so many wonderful memories from Vermont, and the people and just nature. I love Vermont, just love it, and miss it right now because I'm not going to be going anytime soon.
many
Um,
many Canadians have said that, and for
yes,
understandable reasons.
and it's
Yes.
so unfortunate. I feel like something's been stolen from me, but
Yeah.
we'll we won't veer off into politics so much. But
Yep.
so that's really cool though that you went to U of T.
Hmm.
Um, so that's fantastic. And okay, so you went. I love the call out too because you made the call out about you had some really good therapists and then you had some not so good therapists,
Hmm.
and it's unfortunate, right? Because I think there's just a lot of people out there who can't connect. You
Yeah,
can't.
and I suppose it's a little unfair, more than a little. It's unfair of me, I think, to say good therapists or bad therapists. I had some therapists who were good for me and not good for me. That's about me as much as it is about them, I suppose.
You're not wrong, but
Yeah.
I'm a pretty adaptable human being. So when I go into anything, I don't go in with expectations, and I go in with just like, okay, whatever this is going to be, it's going to be, and the energy will let it play out, and whatever. So anytime I ever go to a therapist, it's always been about, okay, well, I can't put them against the last therapist that I've had because that's
Hmm.
unfair for one.
Sure.
They might be in different schools of therapy, schools of
Sure.
thought. Like it's not one size fits all. Fits all. I have, however, encountered in my life as a purveyor of therapy. I'm only here because of it. Um, some truly just bricks.
Yeah. I mean, it's true in any profession. Let's face it.
It is, but
We're
it's
all human beings, and some
yes.
it
But
happens.
anyway,
Yeah.
back to you. So you went and the therapy that you received after your first or during your first and after your first marriage was, but so that's the part. So I'm running back. What part? So like you obviously when you went and did your courses to become licensed as a therapist, you would have done the modules on, and I hate using the word modules, but the modules on couples therapy and all
Mhm.
of that.
Yeah, I got a
What
lot of training in various things, and I found myself gravitating more and more to the training about
what was
family
it?
therapy and couples therapy.
What was it about it? Like, was it because of your own like marital issues
Hmm.
that you felt was the real pull to
Yeah,
that component
probably.
of therapy?
I think that was certainly a big part of it. I just found it was a really powerful thing. I also, it's funny. I remember a signal moment in my development, and again, this isn't just about doing couples work; it had to do with doing individual work as well. My earliest internship with a wonderful supervisor, saying nothing bad about my supervisor, but my earliest internship was with a guy who was very traditional psychodynamic. That was his shtick. And, psychodynamics sort of a direct offshoot of psychoanalysis. And I learned a lot from it. So I'm not knocking that. But I remember this one moment when by then I'd already started to branch out a little bit in some of the trainings I was getting. I was investigating some other modalities as well. And I remember this one moment when we were in a supervision group. So it was me and a few other interns with our supervisor. And one of the other interns was presenting, the way one does in those meetings. He was presenting the work, describing the work he was doing with this one particular client of his. And this is a client he'd only seen 3 or 4 times. And the client came in the most recent time, to when we were describing this. He came in and he said, "Wow, it's amazing. I'm getting along so much better with my wife, with my coworkers, my kids. This is really helping." And the intern then proceeded to comment, "Obviously, it's a flight to health." And that I know what that concept means. And it's not that it's an empty concept. Flight to health basically is a defense mechanism. It means rather than actually confront what we know to be the real demons that you're too afraid to confront, you're going to behave like you're doing a lot better, but we know you're really not doing better. Mm-hmm. And I, little twerp that I was at the time, or maybe a big twerp, I guess I'm still kind of a twerp anyway, I said, "How can you tell the difference between somebody actually doing better and it being a flight to health?" Because the assumption was it had to be that because he hadn't been in therapy long enough. And I'm realizing there's a way of thinking about the work that is essentially predetermining how it's going to be without realizing it's predetermining it. And I realized at that moment, okay, I need to get away from this modality because I don't want to think of people that way. I want to recognize that we don't know as much as we think we do. We have good ideas, but when we get caught in ideologies, the ideas become a caricature. The book I wrote before the one, I guess we'll talk about Betrayal and Forgiveness, but the book I wrote before that has a rather snarky title. It's called "It's Not About Communication: Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong." That is a very snarky title. I don't mean to claim that I know better. In fact, I point out in the book, everything I know about couples therapy is wrong also, which is to say, that's a funny way of saying it, which is to say, if I think I know exactly what's going on with people, that is, to use the technical term, it's full of shit. It is not, it can't be true. I have to recognize that I am not an expert on how other people should live their lives. I do have expertise I offer. It's expertise in having kinds of conversations that will help people figure out how they should run their lives. And that doesn't mean I know better than they do what's going on with them. I think I know how to ask some really good questions and offer some ideas. But if I start thinking I know, and that was my problem with that early psychodynamic training. It knew. It was very much, it knew. This is what's happening, and this is how you proceed. And I find that often does harm, not good.
It's really profound, actually, that you say that, because, and I love how you frame what you do. And that's so important, right? You don't know. No therapist actually knows. However, they've received incredible amounts of training and schooling to spot patterns, ask the appropriate questions, help guide even a little bit to why are you really here?
Oh, yeah.
What is it you want to achieve?
Yeah, and I don't. Yeah, I'm not humble bragging. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I think I do offer some genuine value, but it's not value that would say, I'm going to tell you how you should live. It's value absolutely. About how to have a useful conversation.
I think that you have to. I think that what therapists do, what they've learned and what they practice, is invaluable because it helps create a space for people to, for lack of a better term, unfuck themselves or, get out of their own way, like that sort of thing. What's really interesting too, when you said that about the chap, I'll call him the chap from the first psychodynamic internship, was, well, he wasn't in therapy long enough. And I've heard this before. I've seen it before. What's really interesting is once a year, sometimes twice, I will have a single therapy session. And it is literally what I call my tune-up session. And we get all, I'm due for one right now. We get all, messed up in our heads. I just released a podcast about being angry and feeling helpless with the state of the world.
Yeah.
We get so caught up in our web of inner self that sometimes we just need to have a conversation with someone who's completely objective and that can help us sort through some of the muck and then come out the other end and just sort of feel a little bit lighter. And that's what I typically use therapy for now in life, is that tune-ups, just like you would a car. A car will keep running for a really long time without any maintenance, but you should probably get maintenance. That's how I feel.
Sure. I've done that over the years with individuals. I've done that with couples after they've done a piece of work, and they'll want to come back in 6 months and just, as I say, they'll often call it a tune-up just to have the conversation. And, the experience you get from that, I think, what is the therapist offering aside from the sort of expertise and, having an understanding of what might be some useful questions to ask. It's also about it's sort of by demonstrating they can be the calm nervous system in the room. They can say, well, whatever it is that may be freaking you out, it's implicitly offering what I call faith, actually, and I'm not talking about religious faith necessarily, but when I say faith, what I mean is a mindset that says, this whole living business, as fucked up as it often is nevertheless right to be what it is. There's something right about the whole project. And that's the mindset that can help people get through really hard stuff. And conversely, when I'll meet a couple, and this, maybe we can transition to talking about the betrayal thing, because it's kind of very related to this. When there's been a betrayal, maybe I'll define what I mean by betrayal. I mean, most people, I think, know pretty much what that word means. I'm using it in a pretty usual sense. Betrayal, a stranger can't betray you. A stranger can hurt you, but a stranger can't betray you. Betrayal is when somebody of whom you have some expectation that they would never do that, does that. That's what a betrayal is. And that's, it catches people off guard, and it's incredibly destabilizing and scary. And, it's terrifying often when that happens. And often people get angry and hurt and, confused and all of the above. It's really, really, really difficult. And the most common example in couples that I see is some kind of infidelity. I kind of did a seat of the pants guess. I never really counted up, but I think it's close to half of the couples I see in the first session are dealing with some kind of infidelity. And I say some kind because there's a lot of ways of defining it or arguing about whether it is infidelity or not. But, there's most of the folks who are in that category who come to see me aren't arguing about whether it was infidelity or not. Sometimes they are. Mostly they're not. It's like, oh, shit, I never would have thought in a million years I'd cheat, but I did. Or I never would have thought in a million years that if my partner cheated, I would be here trying to save the relationship, but here I am, that kind of stuff. Faith is when the couple comes in and says, this sucks. This is really painful, but there must be something important about it or it wouldn't have happened, because I know neither one of us is nuts. Neither one of us is evil. Neither one of us is stupid. We all have our moments of all of the above. But fundamentally, if my partner cheated on me or I cheated on my partner, and I'm not crazy, evil, or stupid, I'm not saying it's moral. I'm not excluding, moral judgment. Of course, it's important. But I'm noting you better look at it carefully. Like, where did that come from? What's that about? Otherwise you'll be deluding yourself, deluding each other, and it won't work. And the couples that come in and say, oh my God, that was terrible, we just want to go back to how it was, that is kind of the opposite of faith. They're not accepting that awful thing that happened better be viewed as meaningful and they can learn from it. And the couples that show that kind of faith are the ones that come through it, together or separate. I'm not trying to say they always stay together, but the ones that are showing that kind of faith come through it with a sense of healing. It's like, in fact, what they will often express is gratitude. Never heard anybody say, hey, thanks for cheating. Haven't heard that one. But I have definitely heard people say, in effect, thanks for precipitating this crisis. Apparently we needed it. And, it sucks, but look how much better off we are for having learned what we needed to learn by going through this.
So when you were talking there, what tends to happen to me is my brain's always moving. To start processing information, processing things. So I'm automatically, I think, wired to think cheating is a betrayal, obviously. And that it's the end.
Yeah.
It has to be the end. And what you're saying is that it doesn't technically need to be the end, but it can't be something that you're just like, okay, we want to forget this ever happened or pretend it never happened. We want
Yeah.
to figure out how to get back to where we were.
Yeah,
So how
exactly.
does that even work?
Yeah. Well, my first point is, a lot of different ways, right? Exactly how that turns out depends on the particular couple and I don't know, the phase of the moon. I have no idea. You know what I mean? I long since have given up predicting how it's going to turn out. Even as simple as will this couple stay together or not? No fucking clue. No idea. I long since figured out, old statistician that I am, my guesses were probably worse than chance. So couple you think, oh my God, these people, there's no way they're going to make it, and they do. And this other couple that seems like, well, you guys are fine. This was a little glitch, and they break up. So you never know. Having said that, yeah, how does one approach that? Well, I mentioned numbers of people have sat in my office and said, I never would have thought I would want to save this relationship, but I do. And it's fascinating. And the ones that manage to do that, they only do it by making it better than it was before. That's how they survive it. And those are the folks who can then express some gratitude. It's like, shit, look at that. We're better off than we were. Bummer you did that, but I see where it came from. And now look at us now. We're so much more, the safety in terms of trusting somebody, the safety isn't that they could never do anything to hurt you. That's nonsense. That is not the state of the world. We are all capable of being assholes on occasion. I'm not proud of that. I'm not happy about it, but it is kind of part of the human condition. We all have to be capable of not being very nice sometimes. So, and even sometimes just flat out mean. And I'm not defending it. I'm just observing it sort of built into humanity that sometimes that happens. But the folks that can actually find the meaning in that, they're the ones who can emerge with a sense of, oh, we can learn from this. It's an arc of growth. Yeah, what I was starting to say is that trusting that it'll never happen again is nonsense. What you can trust with experience, what experience can teach you is, if it happened, we'd figure it out. It would suck. Maybe we'd probably break up. Who knows? But we wouldn't be in this place of having no idea something like that could ever happen. A betrayal teaches you something about the world. It's unfortunate, but the world sometimes sucks. And I say that from a standpoint of faith, which would say, well, it sometimes sucks, but it's basically good, even though it sucks. Sometimes it sucks, but it's basically
you're
good.
Not wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like it has a lot of shit in it, but it's mostly pudding.
Well, actually, it's funny you say I'm not wrong. In fact, I will quibble. Actually, I am wrong in the sense of I'm not neither right nor wrong. That's what I point out about faith. Faith is not something that can be proven or disproven, at least as I define faith. Faith is a mindset. It's a value judgment. It's an attitude. It's a practice. It's not a knowledge. So it is perfectly reasonable for somebody to look at all the shit in the world and say, you got to be kidding telling me this is right to be what it is. There's no lack of stuff to point to. There is also no lack of, if you want to look for it, of incredible moments of human generosity and rising to the occasion, often occasioned by that same shitty stuff, by the way. People often rise to the occasion in the midst of all the awful stuff. There's no heroism without danger. Otherwise it wouldn't be heroism, So that phenomenon of recognizing, oh, I can choose to live a life where I decide it's a partly an act of will. I can decide to practice an attitude of faith, a mindset of faith. You can't prove it or disprove it. It's not accurate or inaccurate. But I would claim, and there's even research on this, that if you do adopt that attitude, you're probably less freaked out. You're probably happier. In fact, that the 7 words, my wife and I have merch here. I'm not sure how many people actually are seeing this as opposed to hearing it, but for those who are seeing it, here's my merch. That is a Couples Therapy in 7 Words is the name of the podcast my wife, Judy Alexander, and I do. Yes, and there's the 7 words. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And I came up with that decades ago when some colleague of mine just said, kind of on the way out of a meeting, hey, how do you do couples therapy anyway? Like as if I could answer that, but I'd given it some thought, and ultimately I came up with this formula: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And the whole point is be kind in the sense of kinship. And you can't do that if you're in a panic. So be kind. Don't panic so you can be kind. Well, how do you not panic? Faith is the antidote to panic. That attitude of faith. It doesn't mean you don't experience anxiety. It just means that there's something right about the whole business, so you work with it instead of insisting that reality.
It's so interesting because I feel like what you're saying is very timely. Like
I like to think it's always timely, but yes, especially now.
yes. So my sort of therapeutic approach to all of this anger I've been feeling this year was to do my last podcast, right? What's actually happening, and it's something that you just said, is my mind is stretching because when you just said the comment, and I also have a mind like a goldfish, so like I won't get the exact words, but you just made a comment about you are neither right nor wrong in your belief in faith.
Yes.
No one's faith can be either right or wrong, right? And
Right.
I made a comment while I was just sort of talking at the screen last week about we're here and we're looking at what's happening in the world right now, and we believe with absolute conviction that that is hateful and evil. And the white Christian nationalists are causing all of these things and these issues and all of those particular things. But in that moment, I realized that they feel the exact same thing that we're feeling.
Absolutely.
The conviction and the deep belief. And that caused my mind to expand a little bit. And I was like, oh, shit. I'm like, then how does one combat that? And in the moment, my reaction to it was, I would actually like to have a non-judgmental or confrontational conversation with a white Christian nationalist.
Oh, funny you should mention, if I may. There's an organization in the States. I don't think it's in Canada, but I could be wrong. But anyway, it's called Braver Angels, that was set up to do exactly what you're describing. And in fact, there's another organization which some of the same folks are involved in, actually. My wife and I interviewed a guy he's not a Christian nationalist, but he's a conservative, Christian, who was very, very critical during the pandemic of how the government was handling shutdowns and things like that. He has a podcast. And the head of the NIH in the States, the National Institutes of Health in the States, a man named Dr. Francis Collins, reached out to him because he said, I don't know why so many people are angry about this, but I think I must have some blind spots. And they met through the auspices of Braver Angels, and they have become really close friends. And they still disagree about stuff. But this guy that we interviewed, his name is Wilk Wilkinson. He's the one who's the evangelical Christian. Or Christian conservative, I guess you would say. He has a podcast now called Derate the Hate. I guess he's in the trucking industry, and the word derate has to do with sort of lowering it, and it's all about interviewing people who are doing work in that area. So the other organization I want to mention is called the Pro-Human Foundation. And one of the co-founders of that is a man named Daryl Davis, and he's been profiled in the States on some of the TV magazine shows. He's a black man who decided he would go to KKK rallies and just talk to the guys. And he didn't go to yell, and he didn't go to counter-demonstrate. He went to actually meet some of the Klansmen. Black guy going to meet Klansmen. Impressive.
How did that go over?
Amazing how it went over. And in fact, he now has a collection. I don't think it's literally 200 hoods that they sent him, but it's over 200 people have renounced white supremacy, starting from their conversation with Daryl Davis. It's sort of like notches on his belt, it's incredible.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Talk about, oh my God. I'm Jewish. I wouldn't be showing up at Klan rallies either. The sheer gall, not gall, but chutzpah anyway, it takes to do that is, or balls, you could say, to do that is incredible. But it's all about, the way it worked was he treated them with respect. He didn't yell at them. And it's exactly the insight you were describing a little while ago when you're saying, oh, wow, all those people that I'm thinking of evil and stupid, and how could they be so deluded and brainwashed? No, it can't be true. And that's something I've been preaching for ages. I sense that we are in agreement that we don't particularly like the current president of my country. I
Yes,
sense that.
I
And
don't hate him. I just despise him.
we do not approve of him. Yes, I don't approve of him either. Having said that, I've been preaching for ages. The 44 million or however many it was people who voted for him, or more than that it was, whatever it was, aren't crazy, evil, or stupid. Occasionally some are, but occasionally some are on my side too. So that very phenomenon you noted, it's like, oh yeah, the problem isn't disagreement. The problem is polarity. The problem
Absolutely.
is that we can't, or as I like to call it, the problem is ideology versus ideas. Ideas can be exchanged. Ideas open you up. You hear ideas that you disagree with or challenge you. It's like, oh shit, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's interesting. I may not agree, but wow, that's an angle of, let me think about that. Let me think about the fact that somebody that I can respect, who I know isn't crazy, evil, or stupid, thinks that. That's interesting. Let's start with that assumption, and then we can exchange ideas and learn from each other. Ideology is when, as soon as you hear, oh no, you're on that side, I can't believe anything you're saying. And it just shuts down completely.
And we're seeing that obviously
Yeah.
right now in the world,
Yep.
everywhere.
Yeah.
But if people would stop and invite someone in for a cup of coffee or a tea, and with kindness, try to understand the reason they feel the way they feel.
Yeah.
Like, and without judgment, without being combative. Like, I have my best friend is a conservative, a gay conservative. It's a bit of an oxymoron, but I'm a gay Christian. So
In the States, there's log cabin Republicans. Have you heard of them?
I have not.
Gay Republicans. They've been around for a long time.
So,
yeah.
But he's conservative and not so much a Trump supporter, but more Trump supporter than he was, say, Democratic supporter. And it's interesting because I love and respect him. And he had made a comment one time. I was like, I love how we can just have completely different viewpoints on things, and that's just all it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, you're
it's
not
amazing.
People. So we can have these conversations, and I understand you more. I understand why you're more conservative than, say, I am.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I'm truly fully liberal.
I don't think the labels work so well.
I don't think so either, because I think I'm more centrist than I am either side.
Well,
right?
And of course, kind of by definition, says the old statistician over here, kind of by definition, the majority of people are centrist. Most people aren't in the extremes. That's what the extremes mean. Now you get sometimes distributions where it's like totally polarized, but we're not totally polarized. If you look at all kinds of issue type polling, when it's not asked with sort of dog whistles, or sort of immediate signifiers that, how do you classify yourself? You discover there's broad agreement on all kinds of really contentious issues, or at least lots of overlap. Maybe not perfect agreement, but lots of overlap. So how do I apply that sort of understanding? Why did I write about ideas versus ideologies in a book about couples therapy? Not the most recent one, but the previous one, because it has everything to do with how you work with a couple. And so often therapists go in and they're applying ideology as opposed to actually listening to what the people are saying. That was kind of my reaction to my early training in psychodynamic. It's like, oh, I get it. You're applying ideology. That's it. Even if they're good ideas, that's why I say the notion of flight to health isn't a completely empty concept.
It's not.
But if you use it ideologically, it becomes ridiculous. Oh my God. Another thing I remember about the psychodynamic stuff, if God forbid the client should suggest that they might be done, that is supposed to precipitate a crisis that takes at least 6 months to work through. As opposed to what you were describing, it's like you go in for a tune-up, you have a nice conversation, you feel better. Thank you. I'll call you if I want to come back. Cool. Why can't that be possible? Well, because the ideology says it can't be. As opposed to...
Well, I feel like there might be some other underlining agenda attached to the finding of that ideology. Like crisis, extension, more revenue. Sometimes it feels like that, right? Like it's...
Yeah, you could... There is that, sure. There's the sort of cynical approach there, right? So yes, of course, those forces exist. Of course they do. I also note, I don't think it's ill intended. Do you know what I mean? It's like the people who derive these ideas, I don't think it was ill-intended. I think they really meant well. The people who think, oh, you're suggesting that we should be done, why are you being so defensive? That's not ill-intended. And there are some folks who seem to really like that and do well with it. But I don't want to work that way with folks, because I don't want to view people that way.
Well, and it's just blanket. If you look at blanket therapy, that's never going to work, right? And with every different couple, I'm sure that you're employing different schools of thought, different schools of therapy, and everybody's so different. So if you go in with just a blanket ideology, you're not really serving yourself, for one, or the people that are coming to see you. Now, on your book, let's focus on this book now. I feel like we could have talks for hours.
Here it is for people watching, by the way. Betrayal and Forgiveness.
It's a beautiful stylized book, by the way. I love the black on the yellow.
Yeah, so I know. I was very pleased with it when the designer came up with it. I'm not capable of coming up with something like that, but I had a designer who did.
Well, they did great. I would like to ask a few questions, sir.
Please.
So it appears that there are 3 steps to forgiveness.
Yes.
Can you talk about, because there's the third one is the one that I'm very interested in.
Yes, indeed. Right. So I will talk about that. But I have to say what I mean by forgiveness and what I don't mean by forgiveness, because people use the term forgiveness a lot of different ways. A lot of people, and it's understandable they'll use it this way. It's a common usage. People will say, well, if I forgive you, that means I restore the relationship. If you forgive somebody, that means, well, then we can go back to staying married or staying in business together or staying friends or staying whatever. And I don't mean that at all. You can forgive somebody you don't trust. You can forgive somebody you have every intention of divorcing. You can forgive somebody you have a restraining order out on. It has nothing to do with whether you trust the person. That comes later. And it has nothing to do with what you decide to do about the relationship, except insofar as if you haven't forgiven someone, it's really difficult to stay in a relationship with them. So you definitely have an incentive, because what I mean by forgive, and I didn't coin this phrase, but I like it. Forgiveness is an inside job. In other words, forgiveness, if I forgive, that means I'm letting go of the anger, the obsession, the panic. I process the trauma, to use the sort of psychological approach. That was another part of my training. I used to do a lot of work with folks who were processing trauma, had been through one kind of trauma or another. So that's what I mean by forgiveness. So from that point of view, forgiveness doesn't have anything, or has almost nothing to do with the person you're forgiving. It's really only about yourself. And I will, like so many people, like to quote Anne Lamott, the novelist. She has a wonderful quote about forgiveness. To not forgive is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die.
Well, and see, I love that, because that's what forgiveness is to me. Forgiveness isn't for them.
Yes.
Forgiveness is for me.
Yes, precisely.
I'm releasing all the hatred, the anger, the resentment, all of those negative emotions from me by forgiving that person.
Yes. Then you can worry about what to do about the relationship. So I do say 3 steps. And, I'll put in a little disclaimer. Anytime some clever author says, oh, there are 3 steps. Yeah, right. No, there aren't. It's not that simple. But I will stand by it. It's just a way of understanding the process. So step 1, I claim, is well nigh universal. When something bad happens to me, I'm going to have to, first of all, forgive myself. I'm going to be angry at myself. Even if there's no moral reason why no rational reason that I could possibly have prevented it, I'm still going to be mad at myself for not preventing it, or not knowing about it, or not, how could I be so blind, or how could I have believed that, or what, there's always that part of it. And in some ways, that's the hardest step, because to actually go back and forgive myself, I have to be able to think of it, and not just think of it, but, in my heart and in my gut also feel like I didn't know what I didn't know. And I can recognize that. It's like, I'm always learning stuff. I guess that means the stuff I learn, I guess I didn't know before I learned it, did I? I could say I was an idiot beforehand, or I could just say, no, that's what happens. You learn more stuff and you get smarter, So I didn't know what I didn't know. And from that point of view, I guess I was doing the best I could. Why didn't I prevent it? Well, if I had known it was going to happen, I might have prevented it, but I didn't know. How could I know? Well, you should have known. Well, maybe I should have, but I didn't. I mean, it's, and that even includes things like, so many people, especially when there's infidelity, their friends were warning them, and they were refusing to believe it. People have good reason to refuse to believe horrible things. I'm not saying it's ultimately wise, but it's certainly human. It's like, yeah, that's what we do. It's like, oh my God, you're telling me something and I'm going to have to completely derail my life. If I believe you, I'd rather not believe you. And so, I can beat myself up later when I realize it was true. But, to forgive yourself is really that place of saying, yeah, I guess I was doing the best I could, given who I was, given the forces that were operating. That's who I was. So that's step one. Step two probably makes some sense. Step two is, okay, extend that to the person who hurt you. And I claim that's a pretty short step. If you can really look at yourself and say, shit, I was doing the best I could. And then you look at the other person and say, well, they shouldn't have done that. I'm not absolving them of moral responsibility. But given who they were and what they knew and the thoughts they had going and the resentments they were nursing and whatever else it was, shit, it was human. Yeah, they were doing the best they could too. Now, I realize I don't want to, as I say, I don't want to absolve people of moral responsibility for anything horrible. But on some level, we're kind of all doing the best we can, even when we screw up royally. So Absolutely. That's what it means to forgive the person who hurt you. So that's step two. Now, step three is the one you said, yes, it has a funny name. You do not have to be religious, I claim. You don't have to be religious to appreciate what step three is. I call step three, forgive God. What does it mean to forgive God? Now, as I say, you don't even have to be religious, right? I mean, forgive the fact that we live in this world where we get this tantalizing sense that we can prevent bad things from happening. We've got some control. And it turns out that's not true. And who are you going to complain to? Well, God, I suppose. Now, in the Jewish tradition, arguing with God it's right there in the Bible. It's like, we're all about that. God's got some serious explaining to do, but that phenomenon of recognizing that, wow, it kind of has to be this way, even though, look, I don't have God's eye, a God's eye view of the universe. I don't have all the data. I don't have an understanding of everything all at once. Apparently, it needs to be like this sort of thing can happen, or life wouldn't work. It's sort of like saying, why do we have to have death? Life is really nice if you didn't have to worry so much about death. Yeah, but it wouldn't be life. Life only exists because of death. Death only exists because of life. So it's inherent in what life is that death happens. It's inherent in our whole and everything we're about, that our time here is temporary. And I cannot want that. I mean, in evolutionary terms, I should get really anxious if I think I'm about to be devoured by a saber-toothed tiger, and I should run like hell. I want to keep myself going, but ultimately I better accept the fact that something's going to get me. And if I can do that with some degree of grace, in the end, I mean, that is the reality. So bad things can happen and will happen, and yet we can work with it. That's what I mean by forgive God. And look, that's when I was talking about faith earlier, that's the same thing as forgiving God. In my mind, those are kind of synonymous. It's like, if you have that faith that fundamentally the world is right to be what it is, even when it has really painful things in it, that's the same thing as forgiving God. It's like, oh shit, I can't possibly understand all the details, but the whole business apparently is the way it needs to be. And the nice thing about that, I think, is when you have that kind of faith and when you forgive God, that doesn't mean you give up on trying to fix things at all. Quite the contrary. It means you use the power you have, but you recognize it's limited. But you still use it. You do the best you can with it.
Wasn't being consumed elsewhere.
Yeah.
So those three things, right? If you look at it, you've forgiven yourself, so you don't have to deal with that anymore. You've forgiven the person that did the harm to you. And then you're forgiving God or the universe or whatever you subscribe to, that this was just something that happened and it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay. I'm going to figure it out.
And I'm going to work with it. I'll work with it. And that's the thing. And that's the point. And, I make it sound like it's 1, 2, 3. And of course, it's not that simple. But when you've worked through a bunch of that, that's when you can think much more clearly about, all right, what do I want to do with a relationship with this person? Let's say it's a spouse. What do I want to do with this person I'm married to that hurt me so badly? Can I stay married? Do I want to stay married? If I do want to stay married, can I possibly rebuild trust with that person? And rebuilding trust is not at all an inside job. That takes both. And it's always interesting too, I find, because rebuilding trust isn't only about the one who was hurt trusting the one who hurt them that they wouldn't do that again. Of course, that's part of it. But it's also about the one who did the hurting trusting that the other person can forgive them. Because, most folks don't want to be in a relationship that is permanently, one of them is the permanent villain and the other is the permanent probation officer. That's generally not how folks want to live. I wouldn't want to. So they have to find a way of both being restored to a sense of dignity and a sense of honor, even though somebody did something really bad. And that takes some work.
Because I'm trying to imagine that scenario in my mind, right? But then what I am cognizant of is that there's a lot of external forces that come up for me. And I wonder, how often is it the external forces that dictate a relationship?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know how to distinguish between internal and external, It's like everything affects everything.
Well, it does. I'm just thinking, so if you see, I think I saw a video on one of the social media platforms of this lady who was talking about her husband cheated on her. And she was so upset and they were going to end the marriage, but in the end they decided to stay together and work it out or whatever. And that I'm cognizant, and I'll be transparent. My response to that was stupid bitch. Like that was my response. But I also know, because I don't think I've ever been cheated on that I'm aware of, that these are external ideologies that are prompting these responses.
Oh yeah,
for me,
yeah,
right. So what I wonder, if a couple were to go through something like that and were to come to a therapist like yourself and sit down and go through those steps, keep it between them in the sense, can they forgive you? Can they forgive themselves? Can they forgive God? Can a trust be built? Could that, and leave the external forces out as much as possible, because I know it's not truly possible to do that. Would they have a greater deal of success in making it work?
Yeah.
But that's also subscribing to the idea that it should work.
Well, yes. I mean, I would also note that's a hypothetical you're describing, but I can't imagine it being realistic. I have that conversation a lot. The very scenario you're describing, and I'll gender it the same way you just did, woman saying, oh my God, I want to stay with him. And they're working on it in therapy, and her friends are telling her stupid bitch. That's basically what they're telling her. And I'm not for me to judge one way or the other, I'm just observing that is part of what people have to work with. They have to, especially when there's been a betrayal, there are relationships that need to be repaired that aren't just between the couple. Relationships with the in-laws, relationships with friends, it turns out to be tricky. Now, I do note, seems to me, when it works well, whatever works well is, and I think I noted this before, I don't consider it always a success. I don't define success as whether they stay together or not. In fact, I wrote that other book I wrote about, there's three opinions at least when there's couples therapy. There's the two people and there's the therapist, three different opinions of whether it's a success or not. And of course, mine is probably the least important. Obviously, they have to make the judgment themselves, but often they differ. If I'm working with a couple where they have, they come in hoping, at least one of them is hoping to save the marriage and the other's not, and they split up. Often the one who was kind of wanting to split up is saying, yeah, this is just what we needed. And the other person is saying, what an unmitigated disaster. I was hoping to save the marriage. And I respect both of those opinions. So it isn't always clear. But that phenomenon, if they decide to stay together, they're working with all kinds of external forces that are often, the very reactions you were having, a real common reaction. It seems like women especially will say this, how can I respect myself if I stay with them? It's like, don't I, what am I that weak or am I that dependent or whatever nasty terms you want to use? And often it's not that simple. It just isn't,
Yeah, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
But I think it's just the perpetuating of these ideologies
Hmm.
that, once a cheat, always a cheat. Like,
Yep.
Your friends should, which I think you need to have good friends who are going to tell you the truth in life.
Sure.
But, and I want to apologize. I'm a very transparent person, but I'm apologizing to any of my female audience members or who watch this. But like, that was my thought, stupid bitch, and I'm sorry that was my thought, but that's my brain when I read it first.
Oh, and such a common thought. It's, of course. I
Yeah,
mean, you didn't make that up, you know?
no,
Yeah.
it's not original, but
Yeah.
like I try to always catch things that come up that make me go like, what? Why would you say that?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Why are you saying or thinking that?
See, that's a
So
lot of the work, by the way. That what you just said is a lot of the work. It's like, gee, I thought that, I felt that, I said that. Huh. As opposed to saying, well, that was terrible, I shouldn't do that. It's like, yeah, but you did, and let's start with the assumption that you're not terrible, even though you just said something that was terrible. So it's like, where'd that come from? That's interesting. It's if you follow it up with curiosity. And the another thing I've written about is the structure. I do structure the first session quite a bit. I have specific things I want to cover. I do give a little speech about, or a mini lecture about stability and intimacy, and how the chief skill of intimacy is tolerating the anxiety rather than trying to avoid it. I give a little talk about that. But after that, it's improv. It's basically improv. I wrote a whole chapter on how couples therapy is just like improv, and I'm not an expert on improv, improv theater, but the one rule of improv theater, as I understand it. You familiar with that?
no,
Yeah,
but
the one rule of improv is yes and. It's yes and. Somebody comes up with some absurd premise. You never say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go this way. Never. You go with it and add something perhaps absurd yourself. Well, couples therapy, it's not intended to be comedy, although occasionally it is. We do laugh in couples therapy sometimes because there's some elements of absurdity that can be really a relief to note. But it's a lot about improv. It's about following up. It's like, wow, you just said stupid bitch. I could say, well, that's a terrible thing to say, and you should apologize to all your women listeners. Or you could say, that's interesting because you're not a bad guy. Let's just assume you're not. I don't think you're bad. I don't know. I don't know you that well, but you don't seem like a bad guy to me. What can I say? We're starting with that assumption. And so, but you came up with that. It's like, isn't that interesting? As I say, you didn't make that up. That's in the culture. And there's a piece of it, I got to believe, this is like I say about people who voted for Trump. There's a piece of it that's got to be based on something important. Why would that be your reaction? There's a piece of that says, oh my God, this woman who you're telling the story about is selling herself short. She shouldn't be so stupid. She should take better care of herself. That's a caring statement, not a put down statement. It's also a put down statement. You know what I mean? It has elements of both.
It's a mixed bag for sure.
Yeah. So it's the same thing as to blame yourself when something bad happens. It's not that that's always, usually it's not accurate. It's not rational, but there's a good emotional reason for it. Even, little kids. Oh my God. I've worked with adults that are still blaming themselves for the fact that they were sexually abused at 3. How the hell do you blame yourself for something that happens to you when you're a 3-year-old? But I know how, because if that kid doesn't blame him or herself, they're going to walk around thinking the world is completely out of control. They're going to be in a panic all the time. Better that they should think, well, I must have been bad. It's not good, but it's a survival mechanism.
A trauma therapist taught me that actually.
Yeah.
Was the reason children can't blame their parents, or whoever's doing it, is they need to survive.
Yeah.
And they need, clothes, house, warmth. They need this. So they internalize, like as you said, that they must be the monster.
Yeah.
They must be the bad.
Because look at, exactly what you said. Look at the alternative. These people on whom they literally depend for their very lives, they can't blame them, or how could they survive? So it is that we tend to do that in general. And that's what all I'm noting is there's a rationale there. It's not always good, like a stereotype. Any stereotype has some little element of truth, and then it's mostly exaggerated and unfair. But there's, usually a germ of something in there that is useful. And that, I mentioned that organization, Braver Angels. One of the things they teach about in terms of sort of examining your inner polarity is to recognize when you're stereotyping. And in conversations with people that you're stereotyping, on the other side, recognize, okay, there's probably some truth in it and there's also some non-truth. And their stereotypes of me, there's some truth in and some non-truth. And then we can actually hear each other. So, that comment, stupid bitch, is like, well, yeah, I know where that comes from. It's not completely crazy, right? It's not very nice, but it's not crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not nice at all, but I do like that thought because I am a staunch feminist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where that comes from. I just am. I feel like I always have been. But then I love how you were talking too about the being curious, the examining why you did something. So I'm very cognizant of time. We're almost out of an hour, and we didn't even take a break. So pre-35 and post-35 is sort of how I talk about my life. Pre-35, it would have been, I am an awful, hateful human being. Look what I just said about this person. And in post-35, it would be, oh, why would I say that? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Where is that founded? And all of those things. And you use the word curious. I use the word kindness.
Yes.
Being kind to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that ties into the forgiving yourself piece, right?
It does. And that notion of faith, the difference between your pre-35 and post-35 is you recognized you're not an evil person. So isn't that interesting? You said something that wasn't very nice. It's like, isn't that interesting? That doesn't make you a terrible person. It makes you the same as everybody else. We all say stuff that's not very nice sometimes.
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to say that should be just fine. I'm just saying it's very human.
So I want to do, I just want to talk real quick. So when people purchase this book, they can purchase this book everywhere?
Yeah, they can get it everywhere. I mean, I like to steer people to Amazon because then we're the evil empire. When people buy it from Amazon, they find Amazon then raises it in their recommendations, and so more people get it. But yes, they can get it any place. And if you want information about the book, probably the easiest thing is just go to my website, brucechalmer.com, and that will get you
which
there.
I will link in the description as well.
Thank you. Yep.
You have written, I believe, 3 books?
3 books, yeah. 3 books on therapy. I did write a statistics textbook in 1986, but I'm not counting that one. So still available, actually. Really strange.
Reigniting the Spark as well.
Yeah.
And then you have a podcast with your wife called Don't Tell Me I Want to Remember. I want to remember. This 7 words to save a marriage?
Not exactly, but you're close. Couples therapy in 7 words.
Okay, couples therapy in 7 words. And it's something like be kind, don't panic, and something.
Yeah, we talked about it. What lets you not panic, the antidote to panic. It's that assumption that the world...
Have faith.
Exactly. Be kind, don't
There
panic,
we
and
go.
have faith. Yes.
I love this. Okay, so in the book, Betrayal and Forgiveness, what I like as well, and like I mentioned in the beginning, because I like to be transparent, so I didn't get a chance to fully read the book, but I will, is that you have, I think, 12 different situations.
Yeah, 12
what I liked
couples,
about
as I call them, yeah.
But they're not actually all couples.
Exactly. Yes, that's why I say couples in quotes. Some of them are, in fact, like married couples or partnered couples. But yeah, I have a situation of a woman who is disinherited by her father. I have a situation of 2 friends, close friends, who are also business partners, where one of them royally screwed up things financially. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I find that very interesting, and I like to see things play out, and then I'm someone who loves examples, if you will. Like the examples bring me in, right? And that's what I want to read. So you can get Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again by Dr. Bruce Chalmer anywhere but preferably on Amazon because it ups the rankings and recommendations.
Yep.
So let's get Dr. Bruce Chalmer to the New York Times best-selling list. Come on, we can do that.
Here,
No?
here.
Yeah.
And
We
it is
can do that.
available on Amazon.ca as well, by the way.
Perfect.
Yep.
And you can check out brucechalmer.com, where you can also actually find, I'm pretty certain that I saw that somewhere, the podcast.
Yeah, the podcast you can get there via brucechalmer.com. It has its own website as well, CTIN7 for couples therapy in 7 words. CTIN, the number 7. CTIN7.com will also get you there. And that'll be the podcast website, and you have access to all of our over 200 episodes now. I think 200.
I was just seeing this now. I'm like, holy, there's a lot of episodes on
We've been doing it for 5 years, actually, since it started because of the pandemic. That first book you mentioned, Reigniting the Spark, the publication date of that was February 29th, 2020. Leap day in 2020. What perfect timing to release a book and not be able to do any public events, So we decided we would do a Facebook Live launch, and then and my wife and I did it together because she's really wonderful on camera and her voice is great. And we just had a lot of fun. And so people said, you guys should do a podcast. So we started a podcast.
In the pictures that I see of your wife, she looks extraordinarily kind and wholesome.
Yes, I would say she is.
Don't know if that's true, but that is the vibe.
She is one of the kindest people I know, and many other people would say that. Yes.
All right. So what is next for you?
I don't know, except that the other day, my wife and I were just taking a walk, and I had this thought about what the next book could be about. And I'm not going to say yet because it's too soon to say, but it's starting to percolate where the next book might be. So when it does, I'll let you know. It's probably going to be another year or so, but I'll let you know.
Books take time, right?
Yes, they do.
It's a process in creating good books.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got brucechalmer.com. We've got couples therapy in 7words.com. We're going to buy Betrayal and Forgiveness on Amazon, and we're going to follow the podcast. And thank you very much, Dr. Chalmer, for being here today and having this lovely conversation. I mean, I could have just let it go on for another hour. It was a good one. And for everyone at home, until next time, get out there and live your wildest dreams. Take care.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.